Okay, so it's the government's aid programme, but of course what that means is that it's your aid programme, because it's funded by the Irish taxpayer. It's managed by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and this year our budget is 600 million, which is about 0.4% of our gross national income. So for every 10 euro that we bring in as a country, we spend about 40 cents on development assistance. The goal of the aid programme, in its broadest sense, is to build a sustainable, just world where people are empowered to escape poverty and hunger. And that bit about empowering people is really at the centre of the Irish Aid programme. It's not about giving aid, which I think is very much in the public perception. It's about creating the conditions where people themselves are empowered and have the freedom to make decisions to improve their lives. Again, I'm not sure I need to answer this question for people in the room, but it is a question that we face a lot in the general public. Why do we have an aid programme at all? And especially, I guess, when we are in the depths of a recession or coming out of a recession now. I think the first thing is really, it's part of our identity as a people to have this strong attachment to social justice and the idea that we will help those that are most vulnerable. A lot of people obviously link that to our own history and our history of famine and forced emigration. Secondly, it's a key part of our foreign policy. I mean, as a UN member state, we have a responsibility to build a fairer and more sustainable world. The world's problems don't respect borders anymore. So issues like poverty and inequality, social injustice will lead to greater political instability, which in turn increase the risk of extremism, forced migration, global health pandemics. The Ebola epidemic is the most recent example of that. I suppose to look at the more positive side of it, it also has huge opportunities. Sustainable development and economic empowerment in developing countries actually increases opportunities for everyone in terms of increasing our trade exports, our markets, and then in turn increasing domestic job creation, tourism, both coming here and going abroad. So really, apart from the moral imperative, it's in our interests to have an aid programme as part of a broader foreign policy to create political stability and greater equality in the world. To get on to, I suppose, what Kieran asked me to talk to, where does your money go? I've just picked a few statistics. They have the Irish Aid annual report there, which breaks it down in a lot of detail. But in terms of geographically where it goes, we have a very clear focus, and that is Africa. 61% of Irish Aid funding, your funding, went to Africa in 2013. It varies from year to year, but it's pretty stable at that. That's the green part. The blue, which is the next part, is non-region specific, and that would cover like our funding through the EU and UN that isn't geographically specific. And then there are much smaller amounts to Asia, Middle East and North Africa, and Central and South America. In terms of the sectors that we support through Irish Aid, the top three are really emergency recovery, which is the money you hear when you hear those announcements that we're giving funding to Syria, to natural disasters like typhoons or earthquakes. A huge amount of our budget, about a fifth, goes on health and HIV/AIDS programs. And then the next largest is governance and civil society, which probably doesn't get as much publicity, but it's that idea of empowerment, building capacity of local organisations, particularly human rights organisations, and organisations that encourage civic engagement in the countries and that hold their governments to account. And then obviously quite significant funding goes to other social services like education, agriculture, nutrition, water and sanitation. In terms of who the money goes to, because I guess the biggest difference between Irish Aid being a charity and an aid programme is that we are primarily a funder rather than an implementer. Most of our funding, about 40%, goes to NGOs like Concern, Gold, Trócaire, the International Red Cross. I think they're our top 4, as well as hundreds of smaller organisations. The next biggest, about a fifth, goes through government systems. They would be our key partner countries, 8 in Africa and 1 in Asia, which is Vietnam. And that's, I guess, another key difference with the government aid programme is that government-to-government work. Then there are smaller amounts, another big part is through multilateral organisations, which is the UN, the EU, and the financial institutions like the World Bank. So, what does your money achieve? I deliberately have very boring statistics here because I think it's easy to put nice, happy children in photos, but I think it's important that we look at the evidence for what we're actually achieving. Unfortunately for us, the evidence is actually there. These are statistics that are specifically linked to Irish Aid funding, so it's not just general improvements that we don't know whether Irish Aid had anything to do with. So the first one, the percentage of health clinics that deal with severe malnutrition in Sierra Leone has risen from 21% to 38%, which in a country that has huge malnutrition problems after the protracted civil war is huge. It's effectively doubled their capacity. In Tanzania, almost all of infants now are vaccinated against measles, and that's, again, Irish Aid has specifically channeled funding through local health clinics to achieve that. Now, obviously, we're not responsible for the whole national measles program in Tanzania, but Irish Aid was a key part of that. Very specific number, 670,348 farmers received funding under the Malawi Farm Input Subsidy Programme for legumes. Very important in terms of being a fertiliser, being a source of protein, and being a source of income. 7 million households through this food and cash support scheme in Ethiopia, which targets vulnerable households and provides them food and cash directly through them engaging in public works schemes. 820,000 households with orphans and vulnerable children in Uganda assisted with income generating activities. Again, these maybe at the top level they're just numbers, but they're obviously very real differences in people's lives that are the result of Irish taxpayers channeling their funding through the aid programme. Broader than that, I guess, is the political influence that having our aid programme gives us. It's very difficult to stand up in the UN or EU circles and argue for a certain priority or insist that, you know, a certain agenda should be followed unless you both have the money behind it, but also you're engaged in the type of programs at country level that you sound like you know what you're talking about. And you're not going to have that engagement unless you're actually funding programs, monitoring programs, saying this doesn't work. We have experience in Karamoja, in Uganda. These are the problems. You know, you can't continue with this agenda, or this issue needs more attention. Finally, I mean, your funding, taxpayers' funding, has created a world-class aid programme, and that's not coming from Irish Aid, but it's the international OECD DAC peer review, which reviews all aid programmes. The most recent review of our aid programme was just last year, the end of last year, and it really gave very strong praise to the Irish Aid programme, particularly in terms of its ability to target the poorest countries, which you might think is a given for aid programmes, but actually Ireland is far and away above all other aid programmes in terms of targeting our funding to poor countries, as opposed to maybe countries that you might have political or trade links with. So with all that funding, I guess the question that we often get asked is, are things getting any better? And I'm always surprised that the perception out there is actually things are getting worse, and either nothing has improved or things are getting worse, which actually, these are just some of the photos, I guess, that we get bombarded with, and it's a relentless stream of misery. But actually, when you look at the statistics, the answer is yes. I mean, we don't want to get complacent about it, but when you look at poverty rates, I mean, extreme poverty has been halved since 1990. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with China and India, but poverty is decreasing everywhere apart from countries that are suffering from protracted conflicts. 17,000 fewer children die every day since 1990. Maternal mortality has almost halved, which is a huge achievement that really gets very little attention. But it's down to the investment in health systems and other systems that aid programs, including Irish Aid, have been doing for the last 40 years, really. Enrollment in primary education is almost at 90%, it's exceeded 90% now. And we've also achieved equality between girls and boys in primary education, which again is a huge achievement. Unfortunately, not repeated in secondary statistics, secondary school statistics. And 8 million people are receiving life-saving medicine for HIV and AIDS, and malaria deaths are down by a quarter. And there are lots of other statistics as well. These are the ones I could find nice infographics for us. So, but really, the overall picture is very positive. And I think we can lose sight of that, and it's important that we don't, because if it feels like nothing is being achieved, it's very hard to want to continue the work. And that's not to say we should dismiss the issues and the huge inequalities that continue, but we should step back every now and then and say, well, okay, we do seem to be making some progress at least. That's all I have really on Irish Aid. I just wanted to talk for a second as well on why 2015 is such an important year for development. Obviously, it's the European Year of Development, and that's the reason for this event. It also happens to be the 60th anniversary of Ireland joining the UN. It's the 70th anniversary of the UN itself. It's 40 plus 1, slightly cheating there, years of Irish Aid. Last year was the 40th anniversary of the aid programme. Probably most importantly, it's the year where we are negotiating the successor to the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are the new goals that the world wants to agree on poverty and hunger. They replace these 8 goals, which I would imagine a lot of you are familiar with. Ireland is really at the centre of this, and it's not a coincidence that we were appointed by the UN to co-chair these international negotiations. It's really seen as a reflection of the quality of our aid programme and our involvement in human rights and peacekeeping. But it's a huge deal for the country. This week, actually, our ambassador in the UN is co-chairing negotiations with all of the UN member states to agree these new sustainable development goals. And the goals, there's 17 proposed goals, nothing's agreed yet, but they cover basically every area that you can imagine relating to human development. And they don't apply to just developing countries, they're universal. So all of these goals apply equally to Ireland as they do to Tanzania, Ethiopia, any developing country. So the negotiations, like what Ireland agrees has to be agreed by Department of Health, Department of Education, Department of Agriculture, is not a foreign policy thing. This is something that applies to every country. And to be at the centre of that process is a huge achievement for Ireland, and gives us a huge amount of influence on the shape of the world for the next 15 years and beyond. I'm not sure if you can read many of those goals. There's one missing, obviously there's 17. The final one is on how this will be achieved, the means of implementation, and it just didn't fit on the slide. But if you want to look at those in a bit more detail, we have a section on the Irish Aid website, or also the UN website is sustainabledevelopment.un. legislation.org. I really would recommend that you do read that, because it's a huge deal for the world. It's probably not getting that much publicity, but it will actually affect all of our legislation and policies across every country once they are agreed. Hopefully they are agreed, of course, but negotiations are fairly advanced to this stage, so I think they will be. That's about all I have. Please follow us on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. We regularly update you all on what we're doing on your behalf, so we'll be happy to take questions later, or obviously follow us for any other news. Thank you very much.